Do.
How do you do?
Great.
Well, it's no secret that you've been involved in the controversy over Marge Schott. Were you satisfied with the action taken by the Owners' Council today, or yesterday?
I think that the reprimand and the rehabilitation for Marge Schott is adequate, and I hope that it is sufficient. But I'm concerned that all the focus on Marge Schott, that an attempt to use her as a scapegoat and to absolve the other owners of their sins. For example, in the in Major League Baseball, in the American League, there are 0 black umpires, only 2 in the National League. Look at the other 27 teams plus Cincinnati, what they call the 6 power positions: club president, general manager, personnel director, chief scout, play-by-play announcer, chief financial officer. No black, no Hispanic, no female. All those zeros do not represent our IQ, but rather systematic exclusion. So we want the whole game to open up and to be fair, not just Cincinnati.
Well, Hank Aaron said that it wasn't enough, that she should have been terminated as owner of the Reds. You disagree with Hank Aaron?
I've given you my assessment of it. I think that for what she said, the reprimand and the penalty is sufficient.
You talk about her rehabilitation. What is that? What does that include?
Well, it said that she is going to go through a course in sensitivity and multicultural education for her and for her staff. The fact is, the other 27 owners need to go through the same multicultural process to increase their sensitivity as well.
Well, what is you feel that there should be reflected in the halls of baseball's management the exact proportion of blacks in the society?
No, that wouldn't be necessary. What you have now, rather than getting affirmative action, which is goals, targets, and timetables, you're getting quotas of 0 because of these policies of exclusion.
Well, actually, doesn't Marge Schott have a black manager?
She hired a Hispanic manager about 2 months ago. In a real sense, since she has been hiring people the last 2 months trying to offset the impact of this penalty, she now has more black and browns in key positions than most other teams, in fact.
Well, let's say that an owner said to you, look, it's my team, and I have nothing especially against blacks. I'm going to hire who I want no matter what you say, Reverend Jackson. What would be your response?
Well, if you own a major league team, which is private owned but publicly subsidized, you accept the tax breaks from the public, which is the antitrust protection. You have an obligation for fair employment practices. You cannot decide just to lock out women, or Hispanics, or blacks. We have something in this country called Equal Employment Opportunities Commission, fair employment practices. That's where the obligation comes in.
Of course, there is a disproportionate majority of blacks in many sports on the field. So would you want to have a proportionate number of whites given access to the playing field?
No, well, they do. When the season opens, there is a free market on the field based upon hitting, running, catching, kicking, throwing, as the case may be. Problem is we have a free market on the field and a closed market off of the playing field, and therefore the lockout. You know, when Joe Morgan and Ernie Banks and Bob Gibson, Reggie Jackson have no place in baseball beyond the playing field, and Gale Sayers has no place beyond the playing field in football, as Ernest has tried to do so, something is missing.
Well, Reverend,
we're simply seeking fairness.
Reverend Jackson, wasn't Joe Morgan offered a managerial position and turned it down so as to remain with ESPN?
No.
A very well-placed sports broadcaster that I know told me earlier today that Joe Morgan has been offered managerial positions and has turned them down.
Well, that is not true.
All right.
I can tell you the one who talks with Joe.
Let me go further. In a philosophical issue, there is you are very often quoted as demanding fairness. Do you think that fairness is a higher value than freedom? What do you cherish more, freedom or fairness? And do you see that the two can be in conflict at times?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, it is fair to be free, and free people want fairness. I mean, to be denied your freedom is unfair. I mean, the right to self-determination, the right to grow, and not be inhibited or thwarted by your race, your sex, or your religion.
Reverend, as regards baseball, do you think baseball is unique, or is baseball in the same position as other sports? Do other sports have blacks in managerial positions?
Oh, by and large, they do not. Oftentimes, you have overlapping owners. For example, you look at their bowl games, Sugar Bowl, Orange Bowl, Rose Bowl, and the like over the holiday season. There's not one black play-by-play announcer, and 70% of those in the field were African American, for example.
Although Bill White is the National League president.
He is the National League president, which has not addressed this issue. This past week, when the Super Bowl game was held in Pasadena, California. Now, the reason they were in California, ostensibly, was because they felt insulted by Arizona not having a celebration of the holiday. And they went to California and to Pasadena, where Jackie Robinson grew up. And yet, when Dallas hit that field, on the field were 40 African Americans and 14 whites. In the front office, 70-3. For Buffalo, it was 35 blacks, 30 whites. The field was 70-4. Even with the enormous salaries that players are paid, that comes to about $1.4 billion in an $80 billion industry. You need not be a professional ball player to be a part of the sports industry. Merchandise, more money in merchandising than in the tickets and TV revenues combined, for example. These teams hire lawyers, they hire vendors, which means that a young woman listening to this program right now may want to participate in Major League Baseball as a lawyer, as an accountant, as a manager, as an executive. So no one has the right to exclude Americans according to their ability and desire from these teams.
Reverend, do you feel, did you suggest a boycott if she was not reprimanded?
For each of the teams, as a matter of fact, unless there is an affirmative action plan by April, we are going to meet with the Justice Department related to fair employment practices. We're seeking to organize the Congress people to have hearings. We choose negotiation and a plan for change over confrontation. If there is no plan for change, we're certainly going to escalate the direct action by April of this year.
Do you think people...
4 to 6 years after Jackie Robinson is long enough to wait.
Do you think perhaps you encourage people to resent you when you threaten them?
What people?
Well, not Americans.
It's not that.
Do you think that you encourage the resentment of Americans when you throw muscle around?
No, because Americans appreciate change, and the change comes through applying pressure. When we apply nonviolent, disciplined, direct action, that is acceptable behavior. If one was threatening someone with physical harm, if one was threatening someone with loss of life or limb, that's unacceptable. But to use ones, I mean, what do we say in the voting booth, except if you do not support the ideas I believe in, I'll use my voting power and I'll put you out of office, I'll put somebody else in. Using our strength legally and using our strength morally, using our strength physically in a nonviolent fashion for change is reasonable and accepted.
You made the point that on the field, their throwing, their hitting, their pitching, their catching plays out in a market. That the
free market.
Free market. The best people tend to get the jobs on the field. Do you believe in race norming in other professions? Admissions to medical school or to law school. Do you think that that the test should be modified to favor blacks and Hispanics and other minorities? Or do you believe that the free market should play out with regard to admissions to medical schools and dental schools and law schools?
The free market should apply across the board, but you must also recognize that there are different factors that make up the qualification to go to med school other than just numbers, for example. And we take into account the backgrounds of students and the particular and peculiar gifts that they have. I think that what we have tried to do in the country, for those who've been locked out by law, women have been locked out by law, blacks locked out by law, Hispanics locked out by law, rather than use the reparations, which we apply in most places, we've used a conservative remedy of affirmative action to offset negative action. We got to go out of our way to include those who've been locked out historically due to no fault of their own.
But you still would apply a different standard to the free market with regard to the playing field than you would medical school or the other professions.
Not really. I mean, if you did not have affirmative action, then Jackie Robinson couldn't have got on the field to compete, to play. See, no one would ever recommend that someone have the right to fly a plane if they have not taken aeronautical science and flying lessons. One should have a right to be in the pool to get qualified, because all of us are qualifiable. No one should be in the cockpit unless they can fly the plane. No one should be locked out of flying school based upon their race, their sex, or their religion.
No, but should they be helped to get into flying school with by giving them test points gratuitously?
Or it could very well be that you give them compensatory education, or that you give them assistance, that you might enable them to qualify. Of course, that's acceptable.
Well, is it acceptable just to give them free points, the way sometimes they get, I think in the New York City civil service exam?
Well, of course, that's what we do when people are veterans, for example, and they take an exam to, say, for the post office or for federal civil service. They get 10 points just because they're veterans, and they get it because they were locked out of competition. They were away, say, from regular civil duty, serving a tour of duty. So they get some points because they were locked out. If you were locked out based upon military service, if that is a factor, others have been locked out based upon their race, or based upon their sex.
I see.
And therefore there must be some appreciation of the historical circumstance.
Reverend Jackson, you're a man who's run for the presidency twice, I think in 1984 and 1988.
Mm-hmm.
And in both those years, you campaigned vigorously in the Rust Belt. I think in Ohio and Michigan. I believe you won the Michigan primary.
Correct.
And I believe you garnered a lot of votes in Pennsylvania and Ohio as well.
I did.
They used to say of Richard Nixon that he was a leap year liberal. Remember that?
No.
They did. They said he was a leap year liberal. Do you think perhaps you could be described as a leap year moderate? In other words, when you run for president, you run as an American political leader. But in between runs, do you see yourself as an American political leader or as a leader of blacks?
You know, I am president of the Rainbow Coalition, and we constantly reach out trying to build bridges and pull down walls. And while I am at once an African American, the critical issues of our day are not limited to ethnicity. For example, our need to stop plants from closing and jobs from leaving affects everybody. Our need for fair prices for farmers and fair wages for workers affects everybody. The need for a national health care plan, the need for Europe and Japan to share more of the burden of their own defense, A, because they're able and B, nobody's after them. And C, it's time to reinvest in our country. It applies to everybody. Choosing to invest in prenatal care, Head Start, and daycare on the front side of life, rather than jail care and welfare on the back side, affects everybody. And so while there is a concern for those who have been locked out, who must not be given opportunity, our basic thrust is to move the country from battleground to common ground, because that's the basis for real progress.
Now, in this discussion, I'm in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably not the place where you're most popular in the United States. And
we scored heavily in New York.
that is true.
Correct.
But you've had your problems here in New York as well.
Everywhere. Yeah.
And some of my callers through the months, and certainly in recent days, have voiced the opinion that you are somewhat, perhaps observing a double standard with regard to your condemnation of Marge Schott after you yourself made a reference that was considered disparaging to many New Yorkers.
And I faced the public and expressed my remorse, and some people on that basis did not vote for me. Others the next time around did vote for me. And whether I did or not, and I'm glad I did express remorse, because I think a sincere heart is significant for a leader to possess. That has nothing to do with how we should relate to Marge Schott, or how we should relate to institutionalized racism in Major League Baseball. An owner of a Major League Baseball team, to suggest that Jews are money grubbers and Hitler just went a little too far, and to call blacks niggers, refer to Japanese Americans as Japs, that is morally wrong. And the 27 white owners of the other teams determined that her language was detrimental to baseball. I did not suspend Marge Schott. The other 27 other white owners suspended Marge Schott and fined Marge Schott. Now, my concern is that those who fined her, those who suspended her, now live by the same standards themselves that they are applying to Marge Schott. She should not, in my judgment, be a martyr, and she should not be a scapegoat. The institutionalized racism and sexism in football, basketball, and baseball is very apparent and very documented across the board.
I understand. Reverend Jackson, is it helping African Americans to inculcate in them the idea that they are powerless to improve their lives outside of concessions from white people?
Well, it's certainly documented that black people were powerless to stop the enslavement by white people as a matter of law. After all, the Constitution was written. It was written that only white male landowners had the right to vote. And in that period, African Americans were defined in the Constitution as 3/5 of a human being. That status lasted for 250 years. No immigrant group, no other group has known the slave or the 3/5 of a human being status. And then another 100 years of legal apartheid, legal segregation, denied access to schools by law, denied access to health care by law, denied access to jobs by law, denied access to borrow money by law. So you cannot make a decision if you want to be intelligent and fair, where you have a text out of historical context. This issue of race, there is an immigrant tradition that came by way of Statue of Liberty. There is a slave tradition that came by way of Jamestown, Virginia.
No, I understand.
And people must know that there is a difference between those two traditions, and we have some obligation, given the ugliness of our past, given how blacks, just because of race, were denied access, there must be some plan to even the playing field.
No, I understand that, but what I'm asking is that do you think perhaps you can psych people out en masse into thinking that they are weak and powerless by telling them repeatedly that the only way they can achieve power is through some concessions by other people?
No, and I don't think that's the case. I mean, African Americans just have the right to vote in our own country in mass since 1965. In your lifetime and mine, we just have the right to vote for 28 years. For all those years, white males had no competition from women, from blacks, from browns, to participate in the burden and power of guiding our society. This year, for the first time in American history, the first time, did you have a reasonable proportion of black, Hispanics, and women serving in the U.S. Congress? So we must know that blacks, Hispanics, and women were locked out of Congress and locked out of the Senate just because they had no desire to participate, or didn't have effort, or didn't have character, or were not willing to engage in hard work. And so for the sins of our past, there must be some plan to offset the very devastating impact of laws that lock people out based upon their race, their sex, or their religion.
Do you therefore view whites as the adversary, the opposition?
In some instances, whites may be, but it is very dangerous to, in a broad stroke, dismiss people by their race and not judge them by their character. For example, during the Rodney King beating, we saw 4 whites beat Rodney King nearly to death. We saw the film repeatedly. It was indeed an aggressive, barbaric, racist act. But lest one forget and dismiss all whites as racist, had it not been for George Halliday, a white photographer who filmed the beating and took it public, we would never know Rodney King ever existed. On the other hand, you saw the young blacks beat the white truck driver, Mr. Denny. They should not have done that. Bush referred to them as savages, I think trying to appeal to white fear. But lest we forget, 4 young blacks who saw the beating left their homes and saved the white truck driver from those who were beating him and took him to the hospital where a black surgeon operated on him and saved his life. So there's always a challenge for us to go beyond color and culture to character, because that's how we find them must be measured as decent people.
Well, I think those are wise words.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel now, with the trial, the federal trial getting underway, the civil rights trial getting underway in Los Angeles against Officer Powell and his 3 colleagues, that there is a situation where we have racial blackmail in Los Angeles? Do you think they can get a fair trial, or are they afraid there will be riots?
No, I think the judges in the courtroom will make impartial decisions. But I think it's important that the jury be reflective of the people. When the 4 white policemen were freed, they took the case out of Los Angeles into Simi Valley. The cards were indeed stacked along racial lines. And those people in that jury, by and large, had a predisposition toward that case, and thus, to the surprise of virtually every leader in this country, Republican, Democrat, black, white, male, female, we saw 4 people who nearly beat a man to death walk away free. And that was unfair. That's because that was not a balanced jury.
What about the trial of Lemrick Nelson? That jury wasn't balanced either, and he walked in Crown Heights.
Well, we can only hope for justice, and justice is more likely to come where there's a balanced jury that is fair and is willing on the oath to not bring its prejudices and its fears to that case. Our justice system does not work sometimes, but for the most part, it does.
Are you saying?
And as I travel around the world on our bad days, it is a step above most systems in the world when it's allowed to be fair, when it's allowed to make room for all the people.
Well, do you feel that it would have been a more fair jury in Crown Heights if there were more whites?
Well, I'm not sure, but I tell you what, it is always better to have black and white, brown, male and female juries. I mean, juries should represent the people. I cannot speak to the particulars of that situation because I do not have the facts before me. But as a general rule, we in fact should seek balanced juries.
Do you support the federal civil rights investigation into the Lemrick Nelson slaying?
I do. Encouraged it.
Reverend Jackson, the policemen who beat Rodney King were chasing somebody who broke the law, but the blacks who set on Reginald Denny, it seems, did so out of racial hatred. Why do you feel...
They did so out of rage, and they were wrong. I mean, the police who beat Rodney King were wrong. The young blacks who beat the white truck driver were wrong. No question about that. Is it doubt in your mind?
I'm sorry?
Is there any doubt in your mind?
With regard to what?
Either of the beatings. They were wrong.
No. There's no doubt in my mind at all. However, but bear in mind, I have never seen the portion of the tape prior to the beating of Rodney King. I did not see Rodney King respond aggressively and attack the cops. I don't think Reginald Denny attacked the 4 black youths who beat him, or nearly beat him to death. Whereas I think there's a portion of the Rodney King tape that I have not been privy to. Very few people, in fact, have been privy to it because for some reason they don't show it.
Well, I think you're being demagogic now. I don't think you're being fair.
You sound like some of my callers.
No. I think you, playing radio talk show host and not being fair to people.
I think this is about
people who might believe in you. We've seen.
Reverend, forgive me.
We've seen the film over and over again of these four guys who beat Rodney King nearly to death. Even Darrell Gates himself said it was excessive force. The police chief himself. And we saw what that represents. Those four police who beat that guy nearly to death, lynching with sticks, they were wrong. You ought to admit that.
I do.
As a civilized person.
I don't admit it.
And those young blacks who beat that truck driver because of their anger and their frustration and their rage were wrong to beat him.
Anger at him?
Yeah.
Why were they mad at him? They didn't know him.
Well, and those four cops didn't know Rodney King.
Well, they knew he was breaking the law, but they didn't. But what was the rage? Where did the rage come from on the part of the four young blacks?
Well, once you get into a cycle of racial rage, that's what makes racial rage so dangerous, is that it is irrational. He didn't have to do nothing but show up and got beat. But again, that's no different. There's a biblical story. One time, a man was walking down the street tending to his business.
Yeah.
And two men jumped out and robbed him. They beat him nearly to death. And the Bible suggests that Jesus did not judge character based upon the man getting beat. He was not a hero. He was just a victim. He said the reverend, the rabbi, the minister saw the man bleeding, and he crossed to the other side of the street. And then a man of his own race saw him bleeding, and he crossed to the other side of the street. But the Good Samaritan of another race and another religion stopped and helped him on his way. We would do well to keep on trying to look for these examples whereby we can teach people the value of character. And whether it is the Good Samaritan in the Bible, or whether it is the George Halliday who filmed the Rodney King beating, or whether it's the four young blacks who saved Reginald Denny, or the black surgeon who operated on him. To me, the great moral lesson learned from these very dark moments in our history, that some people rose above the ugliness of the situation. They rose above it. They brought healing, and they brought help. And those are the people whose examples we ought to embrace.
Reverend, we're going to get caught by the network news. Can you stay for a few minutes after the news?
No, this is enough now.
All right. Thank you for coming to the microphones on WABC.
I want to thank you, and soon I want to talk to you about the Haitian situation.
All right. You want to come back after the news?
Yeah, well, give me a... Yeah.
Okay.
This is America's most listened to talk radio station.
WABC New York.
It's 11 o'clock. I'm back on WABC, and Reverend Jesse Jackson has agreed to stay on with us a little while longer. So we're going to go back to the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who I believe we've reached in Washington, D.C. Reverend Jackson, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Thanks very much for staying over the news.
Well, let me express my thanks to you and reach out to the people of New York City. One of the great hallmarks of American character has been the statement that's on the Statue of Liberty, "Give me your tithe, your poor, your huddled masses who yearn to breathe free." We've been a haven for people who are oppressed. And we have a rather unprecedented thing happening in Haiti today. We have a blockade locking people into an oppressed arrangement, locking people into the jaws of a military coup. We have every obligation, according to our own principles, to help restore democracy in Haiti, to return President Aristide with an economic package. It's the poorest nation in our hemisphere. And to keep upon them a blockade that only chokes the poor, and an embargo that chokes the poor, and a blockade that locks people in who are fleeing for their lives, is simply illegal. and immoral and unfair.
Well, I understand that blockade is not the concoction of the United States government, either George Bush or Bill Clinton, but the Organization of American States imposed it.
No, that is not true. That the OAU that has nothing to blockade anything with. That is a Bush policy supported by President Clinton. And my appeal to President Clinton is to put forth his own policy, his policy. We talked about it last week. It's to support sending in UNOAS observers, A, which the military coup resists because they do not want to be observed, stands to reason. B, to restore democracy and return Aristides by a date certain. If we make the same commitment to restore democracy and self-determination in Haiti that we have done to restore self-determination, not even democracy, in Kuwait, that would be consistent. And in our own hemisphere, we ought to do it. There will be major demonstrations this Saturday in New York City by Haitian Americans and their allies from City Hall to the UN, starting at 10 a.m. on this coming Saturday, and Sunday, a demonstration of 50 to 100,000 people in Miami, Florida, simply appealing to our government to take the moral high road and make New World Order work in our hemisphere, starting with Haiti.
Do you want the Clinton administration to lift the embargo, the ring around Haiti, and let the boats come in, even if it means another 150,000 immigrants?
Well, first of all, that's not the real threat. The people who are there now and let me distinguish now the embargo from the blockade. The embargo was supposed to be designed to keep goods from going into Haiti so as to strangle the military.
Right, that's why I think it was originated by the OAS.
No, but that's the U.S. embargo. But let me tell you, relative to Cuba, you cannot get U.S. goods into Cuba because the embargo is serious. In the case of Haiti, it is so porous, they're literally advertising U.S. goods in Haiti. And so it has had the impact of stifling the poorest people, making them even poorer, while the smugglers of drugs and material continue to get through. Because it really was a half-hearted gesture by Bush in the first place. He felt more comfortable with the coup leaders, who basically American trained, and the elite in the hills of Haiti than the common people and Father Aristides. President Clinton has the opportunity to seize this moment, restore democracy and Aristides in Haiti, and bring about a real victory for foreign policy in this hemisphere. It's less complicated than doing it in Somalia, or Angola, or South Africa, or Bosnia, or Iraq. We should do it and have a victory within the first 100 days.
But what do you want them to do? Do you want them to allow the immigrants to come here en masse, or to lift the blockade, or both?
First of all, Pat Buchanan suggested last year that we should build a wall between the U.S. and Mexico. We found that to be reprehensible, in spite of the fact that thousands of South Americans and Mexicans do come across the border. We said an answer would be free trade, to develop our Mexican allies, not to build a wall between us. Well, if we want to open up the borders in relationship with our Mexican allies and neighbors, if we want to open up access to as many Cubans as can escape, then we cannot have a different policy for Haiti next door.
So you want the embargo lifted and free emigration from Haiti, no matter how many new immigrants must be assimilated.
I think what you must realize is that when Aristides was in power, there was virtually no immigration coming to our country. People are fleeing political repression. If Aristides is allowed to go back home, you solve three problems. One, the embargo, which is choking Haiti, comes down. The blockade, which is blocking refugees, is a moot question, it comes down. And three, the military repressive forces leave, and the refugee flow stops at the same time.
Right.
So it makes far more sense to send the leader who won the election 70 to 10. It makes more sense to send him back than to debate should 100,000 be allowed to come.
Has Reverend Aristide been guilty of any human rights violations, to your knowledge?
Well, they're not documented, and I think whatever may have happened, it did not warrant a military coup that killed 3,000 people. I was in Haiti last Saturday, and after meeting with the general, who is now the coup leader, and then meeting with Bazan, who is the acting prime minister, I went to a place called Leogon, which is where the boats are made, which is where they leave from coming to Miami. A 5 or 6 week trip where 300 or 400 people are in a boat under conditions worse than the slave ships of last century. And while that, the men and young women were making them and showing us how they made them and how they charged for people taking the journey. One said, "Oh my God, here comes the military," and they jumped off the boat and began to flee. They were not afraid of the military coming to arrest them for making boats, but rather for talking to someone. And these 4 soldiers walked up, one with a hand grenade in his hand, the other 3 with bayoneted rifles, each wearing U.S. Army uniforms of fatigues and boots and guns. I said, "Reverend Jackson, why are you here?" They said, "We're here to see what the boats are made and what the exodus to America begins." We were in 2 U.S. Embassy vehicles, and they recognized those vehicles, and the U.S. Embassy personnel began to speak to them in French and Creole. They held us for about 45 minutes, as well as demanded of the press and all of us that we show our names, identification, and the like. They are not there to stop people from leaving Haiti. They are there to rob them one last time before they go. But as I left the place, my anger, more than any fear of what they may have done, was that if they had, in fact, harmed us, they would have done so with American weapons, uniformed in American clothes. Now, my friend, that is not right. That is not America's role. It should not be America's role, should I say, in Haiti.
Reverend, one thing strikes me. You are an articulate spokesman for an opposition. Certainly when George Bush was in power, and even now, you represent people who are, well, I suppose you would characterize as disenfranchised, and you've spoken tonight, and you've spoken very coherently about a history of institutionalized racism.
I always speak coherently. I'm intelligent, and I think well, and I speak about what I know passionately. So this is nothing new for me to speak coherently. What's your point?
My point is that why are all these Haitians striving desperately to come to a place that you characterize as a nation with traditions of institutionalized racism? Why would they want to come here? There must be something pretty good about it.
Well, of course, there's a lot that's good about America, but we have an obligation to finish the unfinished business, to make America better. America has incomplete business. There is a history of racism and sexism and anti-Semitism and Asian bashing in our country. It becomes our burden to destroy the worst of our tradition and make of America a better place, to pull down the walls that divide us and build bridges that connect us. America is also a wealthy and a blessed nation, and it obligates us to be sensitive to the rights of others. America has a great purpose and a great promise to make room for the locked out, to be sensitive and caring, the firm self-determination in human rights and the right to vote, and the right to participatory democracy. These are the great promises of our country that have always been forces against them. I mean, think about it. When the founding writers wrote the Constitution, as noble as their objectives were, these men owned slaves and had babies by them and would not give them their names. What a contradiction. These men, while they espoused these great principles of democracy, would not allow their mothers, their wives, their aunts, their daughters to vote. White male non-landowners did not have the right to vote. Native Americans didn't have the right to live. So they had ideals far above their living. And were it not for the human rights, for the Bill of Rights 4 years later, this republic would not have stood and perhaps would not have deserved to stand. So fighting to make this a more perfect union has been the great challenge. And those who love America the most have fought to make America a more perfect union.
Do you feel that you can empathize with the struggles of people that are minorities and even whites, people that are not black, as much as you can empathize with the travails of blacks?
Oh, I have the capacity to rise to the realm of the ethical, not just the ethnic. There's no doubt about that. I mean, when I brought Americans home from Cuban jails, they were not black. When I went to Iraq and confronted Saddam Hussein and made a strong moral appeal to him, and took the first voyage into Kuwait after the occupation, and brought 500 citizens out of Kuwait and Iraq, there were no blacks in that delegation. They were from France, they were from Britain, and they were from the United States of America. And so in my struggle to bring peace in the world and make this a more perfect union, we are quite capable of being inclusive and not exclusive in our desire for peace and justice.
How do you feel about black conservatives, people like Emmanuel McLITTLE of Destiny magazine, or Thomas Sowell, or Alan Keyes? Can you achieve common ground with blacks who are conservative, or do you think they're in their own world, devoid of any logic?
Well, you know, it's according to what they're conservative on. I mean, for example, I embrace the 10 ethical commandments by which people live. Those are values worth conserving. I remember when I was working with Dr. King some years ago, there were some conservatives who did not support demonstrations. It was the constant demonstrations and agitation and high risk, the loss of life of a few, that made it possible for us to have a public accommodation.
So how do you...
Conservatives would not join those demonstrations. They simply discredited Dr. King as best they could.
How do you feel
we marched from Selma for the right to vote. Now, it's interesting that the people who you refer to as conservative have been prime beneficiaries of the struggles of those who fought back. They now teach in universities. They didn't do a thing to open them up. They now have the right to vote. They didn't march one step for the right to vote. They now benefit from affirmative action plans. Didn't do nothing to get them. So we have made change. We've made progress because people sought to change, not because they sought to conserve a status quo that was too limited.
And yet, somebody like Emmanuel McLITTLE will oppose you fiercely on political issues.
So,
are you saying that he is a beneficiary of affirmative action, and so is Thomas Sowell and Alan Keyes?
You know, a case in point, Thurgood Marshall died last week. You wouldn't refer to him as a conservative, I don't think.
Nope.
And yet, his arguments, along with Judge Hastings and Constance Baker Motley, his arguments led to the premise of equal protection under the law in the 54th Supreme Court decision. It offset 350 years of slave or segregated tented law. Equal protection under the law, making room under the umbrella for everybody, it paved the way for blacks and Hispanics and women and workers and short people. You know, prior to that bill being, that law coming into being, in many states, if you were not tall enough, you could not be, for example, a highway patrolman. You aware of that?
Yes, I am.
And so equal protection protected short people, that you could not get bank loans and other options because you are a woman. You aware of that? My point is that equal protection under the law is a radical and revolutionary concept from the aristocracy of the founding writers of the Constitution.
So how do you explain prominent African Americans who hold the opposite political viewpoint from yourself in complete contradiction to all that you espouse, such as Emmanuel McLITTLE and Thomas Sowell? Are these people, are they crazy? Are they dumb? Or do they have a legitimate opinion worth hearing?
Of course their opinion is legitimate. And it may reflect their experience. And one need not belittle someone because they may have a different point of view, because they may represent the loyal opposition. It's not necessary to demean someone because you disagree with them. That seems to me to be uncivilized and immature.
Reverend Jackson, we have just been called by Emmanuel McLITTLE. Would you speak to him?
Of course.
All right. Hold on. Stay with me for a moment. We're going to take a break on WABC. We'll be back with the Reverend Jesse Jackson and Emmanuel McLITTLE, editor and publisher of Destiny magazine.
That suggested that that Emmanuel McLITTLE was somehow or another a beneficiary of affirmative action and didn't march a step for civil rights in the 60s. And first, I'm not one to make any accusations or disagree with you or anybody else for the mere purpose of disagreeing. I need to hear that myself, because this is not the Emmanuel McLITTLE that I know. And in fact, I am troubled by the whole trend that we hear, not only coming from you, but many of those people who pretend to speak for Black America, that imply that blacks cannot achieve, cannot make it without the liberal arm of affirmative action. Not only did I make it without affirmative action, I never heard of it. I never heard of anything like affirmative action during those years in the 60s and 70s when I burned the candle at both ends to go through school at night, during the day, and work at the same time to support a wife and 2 children. And nobody gave me anything, ever. And not only am I furiously opposed to that whole notion that every Black American is somehow a magical recipient of special programs advanced by the civil rights leadership, but I'm equally as disappointed to hear the joining implication that without help, we can't make it alone.
Well, I would submit this to you, that slavery was a special program, and it was negative.
Yes.
And legal segregation...
It's also 130 years gone.
Legal segregation was a special program, and it was negative.
Yes.
And the courts chose a conservative recommendation of affirmative action rather than reparations for a remedy. You know, affirmative action really is a conservative remedy. But we offer for our other allies around the world, you know, for work without wages, for the confiscation of land, is reparations. And so I submit to you, we need not have in the sense of shame about affirmative action to offset negative action. Why is it that most blacks cannot borrow money from a bank for business? It's because of redlining. Well documented. It's negative action. We got public accommodations because in addition to being qualified to use the bathroom of our choice, we had to fight to change the laws that stood against our having them. The right to vote. It didn't just happen because of hard work. It happened because of some early deaths between Selma and Montgomery, Alabama. And all of us need help. All these leverage buyouts on Wall Street. What is that except a letter of intent, letter of credit, and access to capital without cash? That's all that is. You look at the New York Yankees baseball team. What is the New York baseball team except prime property at below market interest? And what is a major league team without public subsidy and private capital? If that's how we build whole communities, then why should we have any sense of resistance to that system?
Yeah, you seem to be void of the whole notion that in 1993, Black Americans are as mature and as developed and as wealthy as other peoples. You seem to negate and always render us to a status of childlike infants, politically, economically, socially, and spiritually, of people who constantly need help. And I am puzzled why it is that your help is always generated from liberal whites. And
I don't think, first of all, I don't know you, but that's not my point. You know, for example, let me share this with you. I mean, how did Europe and Japan make it back after World War II? We made them a Marshall and a MacArthur plan. We made available to them. Just one moment.
Sir, what you did was cut me off
for development purposes.
And I share a certain politeness with you. And I would appreciate it if you would listen to me when I'm speaking in the same light that I listen to you when you are. And my point is that we are grown-up Americans now, and we lead, many of us, the most powerful and the most wealthy cities in this country are led by black folk, and our police chiefs in those cities are black. Our Board of Educations are black. And why aren't you standing up for the right of black people in New York who do not want their children to learn about the do's and the don'ts of what homosexuals do in their bedrooms? You talk a great deal about historical wrong. Well, historical wrong is just that. Historical. It is in the past. Much of what you have touted on the air as a spokesman for black Americans has been in the past. You do not seem to be able to realize that many of us have gone way beyond even many whites in this country. Many of us are extremely wealthy, including yourself. You are not exactly a poor man. And from wherever you got your money and wherever you got your fame and from wherever you got your position in life, you have achieved it as a black man. And many of us have made these accomplishments in life. It is time for those of us, whether you call us on the right or call us on the left or whatever you call us, it is time for those of us who disagree with this whole victim point of view to be heard, Mr. Jackson, and it is time for us to be heard in the same light, in the same volume, in the same power that Jesse Jackson's point of view is heard. This is the great thing that I take issue with. You can command the television crew, you can command news almost any day of the week that you want. But as I was listening here on this telephone to the question that Mr. Diamond asked you, why cannot Thomas Sowell command that? Why cannot Emmanuel McLITTLE command that? Why cannot Roy Ennis command that? I say it's because we are not thinking in the same way that the liberal establishment has told us to think. We are independent individuals. Many of us have worked hard for our educations, have worked hard for our monies, and we are who we are. We are not bought. We are not paid for.
Well, you know, I'm on this show as Mr. Diamond's guest.
And I am as well.
I don't know you, and I assume that we were on here for a dialogue, and you choose to sermonize. Let me say this to you, because you do not know me very well. I would like to know you. I don't know you.
But to make a statement that I did not
let the Reverend speak.
One reason I suppose,
to make a statement that I didn't march in the 60s,
one reason I
you would have to know me, would you not?
I command cameras. July 17, 1960, I went to jail trying to use a library in Greenville, South Carolina. July 17, 1984, I was speaking for the Democratic Convention in San Francisco, having run for the presidency, again in 88. And I suppose because of 30 years of continuous service, I've earned a reasonable access to a lot of people in this country. I think another part is that you talk about we live in the past. History is unbroken continuity.
Mm-hmm.
The past is connected to the present, not connected to the future. The point I was trying to make a few minutes
ago... That doesn't seem to be true for Clarence Thomas.
About this idea of development. Clarence Thomas, if you want him, you got him. I'm not discussing Clarence Thomas. I'm discussing development.
But you talked about your history.
For example, right now,
why can't Clarence Thomas get the shape that you do, Jesse Jackson?
There's a plan right now.
Why cannot Clarence Thomas get a fair shape like you do?
Let Reverend Jackson speak, Mr. McLITTLE.
He can speak if he wants to speak. Clarence Thomas can. Why is Poland making it back now? We made available to Mr. Lech Walesa our Polish-American Development Bank, the U.S. government put together 2 years ago. We make to Poland 40-year loans at 0.75%, first payment due in 10 years.
Yes.
$260 million to build their infrastructure, and $60 million for Hungary. We make World Bank concessionary rate loans to develop people all around the world.
Yes.
Within this country, our major universities are subsidized. Our highways are 9% federal government, 10% state. They are subsidized. Our sports industry is, in fact, subsidized with taxpayers' money. And so for us to be a part of the equation of development does not demean us in any way. But let me say this to you, Mr. Diamond. I really do not choose to stay on here any longer on this debate tonight.
Why is that?
I'm anxious to do it.
Why is that?
All right.
Because I've been on here for more than an hour already.
Wait, Mr. McLITTLE, let the Reverend Jackson...
I have some particular interest, in the first line of questioning relative to what has happened and what must happen in the sports industry to open it up, because it is an $80 billion industry. And what's happening relative to Haitians. I am working right now specifically on 3 projects. 1, freedom for Haitian people. And 2, the ending of discrimination in the sports industry. And 3, DC statehood. And 4, national health care plan for this country.
Yeah.
That's really kind of what I'm working on right now.
Can I share with you what I'm working on, Mr. Jackson?
If you're interested.
I'm working on the concept that black Americans, and there are almost 50 million of us, we are all individuals, and we do not all hold one point of view about all of the issues.
Right.
And when you talked about the money that American taxpayers have subsidized white European nations, you neglected to talk about the $1.3 trillion that American taxpayers have given black governments in Africa for the last 32 years. When you discuss the issues that you discussed, Mr. Jackson, you come from a particular point of view, and that is exactly your right. But this point of view is being represented as though it was the very voice of black America. So my agenda and my job and my thrust in life, and what the good Lord has laid on my shoulders, is to offer black Americans, to offer this country an alternative view from yours. And when I say yours, I do not mean this in a personal way. I say that there is a point of view that is represented by the black establishment in this country that has painted black America into a corner.
Well, I would suggest you're talking too long. It's not a dialogue.
But sir,
let the Reverend Jackson speak.
When you need
Mr. McLITTLE.
There are not 50 million African Americans. That's not accurate. Closer to 30 million.
When you need to discuss what you want to talk about.
And we've not given one.
Wait, Mr. McLITTLE. Mr. McLITTLe.
We have not given $1.3 trillion to Africa.
We have, sir.
It's not true.
All right, let me ask you this.
But wait,
Mr. McLITTLe. Mr. McLITTLe.
Mr. Diamond.
Yes, Reverend Jackson.
Let me express my thanks to you for having a chance to dialogue with you tonight. And if you and Mr. Little want to dialogue, it's the right to both of you.
I wish you would stay.
No, wait.